The courtroom was heavy with silence, the kind that presses down on your chest, making every breath feel like an effort. Every seat was filled, every eye locked onto the man at the center of it all. Sergeant Nathan Carter sat in his wheelchair, his military uniform crisp, the medals on his chest glinting under the fluorescent lights. His hand clutched the leash of the German shepherd beside him, Thor, a loyal companion with a calm yet ever-watchful gaze. To the rest of the world, Thor was just another military working dog. But to Nathan, he was so much more. He was family. Nathan's jaw tightened as the judge addressed him, reminding him that this was his final chance to speak. The army had made its decision. Thor was to be reassigned, considered government property, needed for another mission. After years of facing life and death situations together, the thought of losing Thor now felt like the cruelest betrayal. Nathan's hands trembled as he adjusted his grip on the leash, his voice thick with emotion. "Your Honor," he began, barely holding himself together. "Thor isn't just a military asset. He saved my life in ways no one here could ever understand. In the field, he pulled me from danger, shielded me from gunfire, even warned me of traps before I could see them. And when I came home, when I couldn't even face myself in the mirror, Thor was there. He gave me a reason to keep going. Please, don't take him from me." The room remained utterly still, thick with unspoken sympathy. Some spectators dabbed at their eyes, while others exchanged glances, a mix of pity and outrage in their expressions. The judge's face remained unreadable, his gaze fixed on Nathan. He leaned forward, preparing to deliver his ruling. But before he could utter a single word, something unexpected happened. Thor stood abruptly, yanking the leash free from Nathan's trembling hands. The dog moved toward the judge, barking sharply, his voice echoing through the tense courtroom. Gasps rippled through the crowd. The bailiffs tensed, stepping forward instinctively, but Thor showed no signs of aggression. His barks weren't wild or panicked, they were insistent, purposeful, as if he was trying to communicate something urgent. "Thor!" Nathan's voice cracked with panic, but deep down, a chill ran through him. He had seen this before, too many times on the battlefield. Thor wasn't just barking, he was alerting. A murmur spread through the courtroom. "What's wrong with the dog?" someone whispered from the back row. Nathan's heart pounded as he wheeled himself forward, his voice unsteady. "He only does this when there's danger." He swallowed hard. "He's trying to warn us." The judge froze, his gavel forgotten in his grip. The entire room held its breath. And then, nothing but silence. Except for Thor's barks, steady and unwavering. Like a heartbeat. Something was wrong. And whatever it was, Thor knew it before anyone else did. For the first time that day, Nathan felt something he hadn't in a long time. Hope. Because this wasn't just a goodbye. Something bigger was about to unfold. Thor was determined to make them all see it. The only sound in the courtroom was his relentless barking, each sharp, urgent cry echoing off the dark wooden walls, cutting through the thick, suffocating silence like a blade. Every pair of eyes shifted toward him, wide with confusion, fear creeping into their expressions. Thor's stance was low, his body tense, ears pinned back, and gaze locked onto the judge's bench with unwavering intensity. Nathan's grip tightened on the armrests of his wheelchair. He had seen this before. This wasn't random barking. Thor had detected something. His heart pounded, a rush of adrenaline surging through him like he was back on the battlefield. But this wasn't war. This was supposed to be a place of order, a courtroom. "Thor, heel," Nathan commanded, his voice firm but unsteady. For a brief second, Thor flicked his gaze back at him, sharp, reassuring, as if to say, "I know what I'm doing." Then, without hesitation, he turned back to the judge's bench, pacing in deliberate, measured steps. His barking shifted to deep, guttural growls that sent shivers down the spines of those watching. A ripple of unease spread through the audience. Murmurs turned into whispers, their earlier sympathy now morphing into nervous tension. "Mr. Carter," the judge said, his irritation thinly veiled beneath his stern tone. "Control your dog, or I will have to." "Your Honor," Nathan interrupted, louder this time, his voice steadier despite the fear clawing at his chest. "Thor isn't misbehaving. He's trained to detect threats, bombs, explosives, danger. He wouldn't act like this unless something was wrong." A hush fell over the room. The judge's stern gaze faltered. A creeping sense of dread replaced the initial skepticism. And then, suddenly, Thor stopped barking. The abrupt silence was deafening. His entire body went rigid. His ears perked sharply, his gaze snapping toward the far end of the courtroom. A low, menacing growl rumbled from his chest, deeper than before. It was a warning. The shift was so immediate, so intense, that even the judge froze. All eyes followed Thor's gaze to the heavy wooden doors at the far end of the courtroom. The murmurs turned to panicked whispers. Nathan's breathing quickened as he followed Thor's line of sight. His pulse thundered in his ears. He had seen this exact reaction before, just moments before Thor uncovered a buried explosive, or before he signaled an enemy ambush. This wasn't just about him anymore. "Thor," Nathan whispered, his voice cracking with tension. "What is it?" Thor didn't move. His entire body remained locked in place, muscles coiled like a spring. His growl grew deeper, vibrating through the air like the distant rumble of an approaching storm. The unease in the room thickened into something suffocating. Even the judge, who moments ago had been ready to reprimand Nathan, now sat motionless, his gavel forgotten in his grip. The bailiffs exchanged uneasy glances, shifting slightly toward the doors, their hands hovering near their holsters. Nathan's fingers dug into his armrests as he braced himself. He didn't know for what, but he knew Thor, and he knew that whatever was coming, it was already here. Death. Thor's warning had always meant one thing: danger was close. Very close. "Stay calm," Nathan murmured to himself, but the words felt hollow even to him. The bailiffs, unsure of how to proceed, hesitated by the judge's bench. One of them, a broad-shouldered man with a wary expression, finally stepped forward, his hand resting on the weapon at his hip. "It's just a dog, right?" he muttered, though his voice betrayed his unease. Probably reacting to the noise or the crowd. Yet, even as he spoke, his steps were cautious, his movements deliberate. Nathan shook his head, his voice rising just enough to cut through the murmurs in the room. "Number Thor doesn't react to noise or people like this. He's trained to sense danger, things we can't see. Trust me, if he's growling like that, there's a reason." His words hung in the air, and for a moment, no one moved. The judge, visibly unsettled, finally nodded toward the bailiffs, motioning for them to check the door. Thor's growl deepened as they approached, his tense body a clear sign of warning. The larger bailiff hesitated, then reached out, gripping the metal handle. The entire room held its breath. Nathan's heart pounded as he watched, every muscle in his body coiled with anticipation. Thor's body remained rigid, his growls turning into sharp, clipped barks as the handle began to turn. The door creaked open, revealing the dark hallway beyond. At first, it seemed empty. But Thor's barking only intensified, his eyes fixed on something unseen. The larger bailiff stepped cautiously into the hallway, his hand still resting near his weapon. He glanced back at the courtroom, his face suddenly pale, then turned forward again. A second later, his voice broke the silence. "There's something here." Nathan's pulse quickened as he leaned forward in his chair, his chest tightening with dread. Whatever the bailiff had seen, it was enough to trigger Thor's instincts. And Nathan knew one thing for certain: Thor was never wrong. The air in the courtroom grew heavier, thick with tension. It felt as though the very oxygen was being pulled from the room. Thor's barking echoed sharply, his stance locked in pure alertness, muscles tight, head low, eyes unwavering on the dark hallway beyond the open door. The larger bailiff, now visibly uneasy, took another step forward, his boots clicking softly against the tiled floor. His hand hovered near his weapon, his body stiff with caution, as if expecting something to lunge from the shadows. "What's going on out there?" the judge demanded, his voice cracking slightly despite his effort to maintain authority. He gripped the gavel tightly, his knuckles pale, his eyes darting nervously between the doorway and Thor. The dog's growls deepened, a low, menacing rumble vibrating through the courtroom, sending chills through everyone present. The larger bailiff looked back at the room, his face tense with uncertainty. "I don't see anything," he said hesitantly, his words measured. "But something doesn't feel right." His gaze shifted back to the hallway, his brow furrowed as if trying to shake off his own doubts. "It's quiet. Too quiet." His voice was barely above a whisper, but it carried through the silent room like a gunshot. Nathan leaned forward in his wheelchair, his stomach twisting into knots. He had heard those words before, too quiet. Countless times on the battlefield, they had always preceded disaster. Nathan's voice rose, cutting through the rising murmurs of the crowd. "Thor doesn't react to nothing. If he's acting like this, there's a reason. We need to evacuate the room, now." His command rang with urgency, but the spectators remained frozen, paralyzed by fear and confusion. The smaller bailiff stepped forward, drawing a flashlight from his belt and aiming the beam into the hallway. The bright light cut through the shadows, illuminating the length of the polished floor. "There's nothing," he muttered, though his tone was uneasy. "It's just an empty hallway." But even as he spoke, his hand trembled slightly, betraying his calm facade. Thor, however, was far from calm. The dog's growling only grew louder, his barking more frantic as he strained forward, nearly yanking the leash from Nathan's grip. Suddenly, a sharp metallic clang echoed down the hallway, the sound unmistakable and jarring in the suffocating silence. The smaller bailiff flinched, his flashlight beam shaking as he instinctively stepped back. Thor lunged toward the sound, barking ferociously, his claws scraping against the floor as he strained against his leash. Gasps erupted from the courtroom, and panic began to ripple through the crowd. The larger bailiff instinctively drew his weapon, his voice tight with alarm. "What the hell was that?" Nathan's heart pounded in his chest as he raised his voice above the chaos. "Get Thor back," he yelled, his voice trembling with a mix of fear and certainty. "He's never wrong. Something's coming." But before anyone could respond, the metallic clang echoed again, louder this time as if whatever had caused it was now much closer. The air felt thick, charged with an invisible energy that sent a wave of dread through the room. Whatever Thor had sensed, it was no longer a question of if. It was now a question of when. The metallic clang rang out once more, sharper, closer, like an alarm reverberating through the hallway. The tension in the courtroom coiled even tighter, the weight of the unknown pressing down on everyone present. Thor barked ferociously, his body straining against the leash as if sheer will alone could push through the doorway and confront whatever was out there. Nathan gripped the leash tightly, his knuckles white, his pulse racing in his ears. He could feel it now, too. Something was wrong. Something was coming. The larger bailiff stepped fully into the hallway, gun drawn, his eyes scanning the dimly lit corridor. His partner followed cautiously, flashlight trembling slightly in his hand. The beam cut through the darkness, but the hallway appeared empty, silent, still. Yet Thor's barking didn't waver. His growls grew deeper, more insistent. Nathan's instincts screamed at him to act, to demand an evacuation. But he could already see the fear paralyzing the room. No one was moving. "Do you see anything?" the judge called out, his voice cracking as he leaned forward in his seat. The gavel trembled slightly in his grip. and his usual air of authority was replaced with an unmistakable edge of fear. The larger bailiff glanced over his shoulder, his face pale and glistening with sweat. "Nothing yet," he said, his voice low but tight, as if he were afraid that speaking too loudly would provoke whatever might be lurking. "But it doesn't feel right." He took another step forward, the weight of his boots echoing down the hall. The spectators in the courtroom whispered nervously, some clutching their belongings, others inching toward the exits. The uneasy energy in the room was spreading like wildfire. Nathan wheeled himself forward slightly, his eyes locked on Thor, who had gone silent again. The dog's ears were rigid, his body motionless, his gaze still fixed on the open doorway. "Thor's locked onto something," Nathan said, his voice trembling. "I don't know what it is, but it's there." And then, just as the bailiff reached the halfway point in the hallway, a shadow moved. It was brief, barely perceptible, but enough to make the smaller bailiff stumble backward, his flashlight beam jerking wildly. "There!" he shouted, his voice filled with panic. The larger bailiff froze, his gun snapping up, aimed at the darkness. Thor erupted into barking again, lunging so hard against his leash that Nathan's grip nearly gave out. "Back up!" Nathan shouted, his voice echoing in the courtroom. "Get out of there!" The judge slammed his gavel, trying to regain order, but the sound was swallowed by the growing chaos. People were rising from their seats, murmurs turning to shouts as the panic spread. And then, from the darkness of the hallway, came another sound, a heavy, deliberate footstep. It wasn't hurried. It wasn't rushed. It was calm, and it was getting closer. Thor's barking turned into a snarl, his teeth bared as his body pushed forward with unrelenting force. Nathan felt his chest tighten, dread flooding his body. Whatever was in that hallway wasn't in a hurry. It wasn't hiding. It was coming straight for them, and it wanted to be seen. The heavy footstep echoed louder than the courtroom could bear, cutting through the growing chaos like a blade. Thor's snarls filled the air, his body pulling against the leash with such force that Nathan had to anchor himself in his wheelchair to keep from being yanked forward. The tension was suffocating now, every pair of eyes locked on the dark hallway, the source of the sound that no one wanted to face. "Everyone stay calm," the judge shouted, slamming his gavel again. But the command fell on deaf ears. People were rising from their seats, clutching their bags, their hands, anything they could find, as if holding on to something would somehow save them from the unknown threat. The larger bailiff stood frozen in the hallway, his gun raised and aimed into the darkness. His partner remained behind him, the flashlight beam darting nervously across the walls, catching every shadow but revealing nothing concrete. Nathan's voice broke through the mounting noise. "Get out of there!" he shouted, his tone sharp and urgent. "Whatever it is, it's not safe." His words were sharp as a blade, but the larger BFF didn't flinch. Instead, he narrowed his eyes, scanning the dim corridor, his jaw clenched. Then, the shadow moved again. This time, there was no mistaking it. Slow, deliberate, purposeful. The smaller BFF let out an audible gasp, his flashlight trembling in his unsteady grip. "There's someone there," he stammered, his voice barely above a whisper. For just a fraction of a second, the beam of light caught something. A silhouette, tall and looming, and then just as quickly as it appeared, it vanished, retreating into the darkness. But it was enough. A ripple of fear spread through the room. The larger BFF tightened his grip on his weapon, his voice steady but low. "Show yourself," he commanded. "Step out where I can see you." Silence. Thick, heavy, oppressive. It stretched endlessly, filling the air with an unbearable tension. Thor's barking escalated, his teeth bared, his body coiled like a spring, ready to lunge. And then, it happened. The figure stepped into the light, slowly, calmly, almost unnervingly. It was a man, his face hidden beneath a hood, hands tucked deep into the pockets of a heavy coat. His movements were measured, his posture unsettlingly relaxed despite the chaos he had just caused. He stopped right at the edge of the flashlight's beam, his head tilting slightly, almost as if amused. Thor's growling turned feral, his claws scraping against the floor as Nathan struggled to hold him back. "Who are you?" The larger BFF's voice was firm, his gun locked onto the figure. The man didn't answer. Instead, he took another step forward. Slow, calculated, the faintest smirk played at the corner of his lips, barely visible beneath the shadows of his hood. Nathan's breath caught in his throat. A cold wave of dread settled deep in his chest. Something about this man felt wrong. Not just dangerous, fundamentally wrong. Then, the man slowly raised his hands, a gesture that should have been reassuring, but it wasn't. Instead, it only made both BFFs grip their weapons even tighter. "Relax," the man said, his voice low, eerily calm, chillingly confident. "I'm not here to hurt anyone." But the way he spoke, the way his words lingered in the air, made the room feel even colder. Nathan knew immediately. This man was lying. Thor knew it too. The room plunged into a stunned silence as the man stood at the edge of the hallway, his figure partially illuminated by the flickering beam of the flashlight. Thor's growls rumbled low and constant, vibrating through the tense courtroom. The bailiffs kept their weapons steady, but their hands trembled despite years of training. Nathan's heart pounded against his ribs as he stared at the stranger. The man's posture was too calm, too deliberate, like he thrived on the fear he was creating. "Step forward, slowly," the larger bailiff ordered, his voice sharp with authority, though an unmistakable thread of unease ran beneath it. The man tilted his head slightly, his face still obscured by the hood, then took one slow step forward. His boots clicked softly against the tiled floor. Every movement was measured, calculated, like he was savoring the tension thickening around him. Thor barked furiously, lunging against his leash, claws scraping against the floor. Nathan tightened his grip, his palms slick with sweat. "Thor knows," Nathan muttered under his breath, his voice shaking. "He can feel it. Something's wrong." Though his words were barely above a whisper, the judge glanced at him, his expression a mix of fear and uncertainty. The smaller bailiff took a cautious step forward, flashlight in one hand, the other hovering near his holster. "Sir," he said, voice cracking slightly, "identify yourself." Now. At last, the man lifted his head. His face, partially revealed beneath the shadow of his hood, was unreadable. His eyes, cold, piercing, held an intensity that sent a chill through Nathan's spine. "I'm not here to hurt anyone," the man repeated, his voice disturbingly smooth, hollow. Then, he reached into his pocket. Both bailiffs tensed, weapons raising instinctively. A ripple of gasps swept through the room. Someone in the back whispered, "He's got something." The air felt ready to snap, like a fragile thread stretched too thin. Nathan's instincts screamed at him to act, but his feet refused to move. He clutched Thor's leash like it was the only thing tethering him to the moment. The stranger's hand emerged, revealing something small and metallic. "Drop it!" The bailiff's voices rang out in unison. The man froze, then smirked. "Relax," he said smoothly, holding the object up. The dim light caught its surface, a key. But there was no relief, no release from the suffocating tension. Nathan's stomach churned. Thor didn't stop barking, didn't look away, as if he knew the key was nothing but a distraction. Nathan's grip on the leash tightened. "It's not what it looks like," he whispered to himself. "He's hiding something. He has to be." The stranger's smirk widened as if he could hear Nathan's thoughts. And then, the room teetered on the edge of something inevitable, something unstoppable, a single sound that sent ice through his veins, footsteps, heavy, rushed, moving fast. Nathan's pulse thundered in his ears as the darkness swallowed the room. Thor's barking became frantic, guttural, an alarm no one could ignore. His hands trembled as he gripped the leash tighter, his breath coming in short, panicked gasps. Something wasn't right. This man wasn't just a threat. He was the tip of something much larger, much darker. "Drop the key and back away!" the larger bailiff barked, his weapon never wavering. The smaller bailiff edged closer, flashlight steady, but his face pale with unease. The man, unfazed by the weapons aimed at him, tilted his head slightly. Then his gaze shifted to Thor. "That dog," he said, his voice unsettlingly calm, almost conversational. "He's special, isn't he? Always knows things before they happen. That's what makes him so valuable." The air in the room turned ice cold. Nathan's stomach lurched. How did this man know about Thor? About his instincts? The hair on the back of his neck bristled as he forced himself to speak. "How do you know that?" His voice was sharp, but it wavered beneath the weight of growing terror. Thor lunged forward against the leash, barking with a ferocity Nathan had never seen before, as if trying to shield him from something only he could sense. The man's smirk deepened, his eyes glinting with something sinister. Then, slowly, almost tauntingly, he lifted the key. "You'll find out soon enough," he murmured, his voice chilling in its certainty. And then, click, the sound of metal turning, subtle, final, wrong. Thor erupted into a frenzy, his barking deafening. And then, the lights flickered, once, twice, darkness, a breathless, total void, and in that blackness, through the panic and gasps, footsteps, moving fast, coming closer. Neither was he. The scrape of chairs and the frantic shuffle of feet filled the air as fear took hold of the courtroom. People pushed toward the exits, their voices rising in confusion and panic. And then, the lights flickered back on. But the stranger was no longer alone. Emerging from the hallway like shadows made flesh were two more figures. Their faces were obscured, their movements precise, controlled, dangerous. In their hands, weapons gleamed under the harsh artificial glow. Nathan's breath caught. His eyes darted to Thor, whose growl had deepened into something almost primal, a sound that sent shivers down Nathan's spine. This wasn't just about a man with a key. This was something much, much bigger. And it had just begun. The larger bailiff stepped forward, his flashlight cutting through the uneasy dimness. "Stay where you are," he commanded. But the stranger didn't stop. He took another step forward, slow and deliberate, his expression eerily calm. The two figures behind him matched his pace, their presence suffocating the room with tension. The judge slammed his gavel. "Everyone stay calm." But his voice was barely heard over the rising panic. And then, the stranger spoke, smooth, measured, chilling. "No one needs to get hurt. All I want is the dog." The room froze. Nathan's blood ran cold. He tightened his grip on the leash as Thor's low growl reverberated through the space. The dog's sharp eyes never wavered from the man before them. Nathan's pulse pounded, his throat went dry. And then, he found his voice. "You're not taking him." The words were strong, but there was something else there too, something raw, something unshakable. He wheeled himself closer to Thor, his grip like iron. "He's not just a dog. He's my partner, my family. I don't care who you are or what you think you're entitled to. You're not taking him." The weight of his words hung in the air. For a moment, everything stopped. The stranger's smirk faded. His eyes narrowed, calculating, searching. "You're making this more complicated than it needs to be," he said coolly, his gaze flicking back to Thor. For the briefest second, frustration flashed across his face. "He's special, you know that, but keeping him will only make things harder for you." Nathan clenched his jaw. His hands didn't tremble, his voice didn't shake. "Thor stays with me." Murmurs rippled through the crowd. Some whispered for calm, others whispered in fear. The air in the room felt thick, heavy, Time stretched unbearably thin, and then Thor barked, loud, sharp, final, a sound that shattered the moment and pulled everything back into the now. His focus on the stranger was absolute. He knew. He knew exactly what was at stake. Nathan's chest tightened. He leaned forward, every muscle in his body tense, ready to do whatever it took. Because whatever this man wanted, whatever dark truth lay behind his words, one thing was certain. Thor wasn't going anywhere, and neither was he. The standoff was far from over. The courtroom hung in a suffocating silence, thick with unspoken threats and unshaken resolve. Every person in the room was frozen in place, their breaths held as if the wrong move might shatter the fragile stillness. The stranger stood motionless, his piercing gaze locked onto Thor. The dog's growl rumbled low and steady, a warning that vibrated through the floor like distant thunder. His body was coiled, every muscle tensed, ready to strike. Nathan held the leash with both hands, his grip tight, his stance unyielding. He met the stranger's stare without a flicker of fear. The bond between him and Thor was absolute, unyielding in the face of danger. The two figures behind the stranger remained still, no longer advancing, but still there, looming, waiting. The moment stretched endlessly. And then, the judge spoke. He cleared his throat, trying to steady his voice, and with all the authority he could summon, declared, "You've disrupted a court of law. This ends now. Bailiffs, escort these men out." His words cut through the thick tension, reigniting the urgency of the moment. The bailiffs hesitated only for a second before stepping forward, cautious but firm. Thor let out another sharp bark, his teeth bared, his body still locked on his target. And then, the stranger moved, not forward, not back. He simply raised a hand, a silent signal. The two figures behind him obeyed instantly, freezing in place. Then, slowly, his expression shifted. Not to anger, but something colder, something even more unsettling. Resignation. "This isn't over." His voice was calm, measured, but dripping with quiet menace. "You think this is just about the dog, but it's bigger than that. Much bigger. You'll see soon enough." He took a single step back, his smirk returning. But this time, it wasn't amusement. It was confidence. Cold, calculating. "For now, I'll leave." His eyes flicked toward Thor, dark and knowing. "But he belongs to us, Nathan, and we'll be back." Nathan's chest tightened, but his grip never wavered. "He belongs to no one but me." His voice was clear, strong, unshakable. "And whatever it is you're after, you'll have to go through both of us." The words hit like steel, and for the first time, the stranger hesitated. His eyes narrowed, his smirk fading for a fraction of a second, just long enough for Nathan to see something behind them. Doubt. But then, just as quickly, he turned. Without another word, he motioned for his companions to follow. The tension in the room didn't ease until the doors clicked shut behind them. And then, all at once, silence. Spectators slowly lowered themselves back into their seats, whispers rippling through the room, hushed but frantic. No one could quite grasp what had just happened. The judge exhaled heavily, setting down his gavel with a shaking hand. "This court is adjourned." His voice barely carried over the murmurs, exhausted and weary. But Nathan remained still. His eyes were still fixed on the door, his mind racing. Thor finally sat beside him, his growls fading, but his body remained alert, ears pricked, muscles ready. Nathan reached down, his fingers brushing gently over Thor's head, feeling the steady rhythm of his breathing beneath his palm. "You did good, buddy." The whisper carried a weight of relief, exhaustion, and something deeper. As the courtroom emptied, Nathan didn't move. He didn't know who that man was, or why he wanted Thor. But one thing was certain. This wasn't over, not by a long shot. Still, for now, as Thor leaned against his leg, Nathan let himself breathe. Whatever was coming, they'd face it together, their bond unbreakable, untouchable,